What a week it was at the National Assembly. And I have every detail. Welcome to the Gavel, where we keep up with the Nigerian Parliament. I am Terry Ikumi. Now, two major events happened this past week. One, the tax reform bills peacefully scaled second reading in the House of Representatives. Now, for those who followed the conversations, you'd understand how big a deal that is, considering that it had openly divided lawmakers. But then, the deal isn't sealed yet. Some of the initial concerns still exist. So let's see how this plays out eventually. The second major event is the passage of the 2025 budget by both chambers, and that's where we will begin today. Here's a report on that.
2 months after President Bola Tinubu submitted a 47.9 trillion naira budget proposal for the year 2025, and a week after increasing that figure to 54.2 trillion, lawmakers in both chambers of the House convened to consider the report of the committees on appropriation following weeks of budget defense sessions.
Having worked in harmony with the House of Representatives Committee on Appropriation and the subcommittee of the two chambers, the Senate do consider and approve a bill for an act to authorize the issuance from the Consolidated Revenue Fund of the Federation the total sum of 54 trillion 990 billion 165 million 355,396.
The breakdown includes significant allocations for capital expenditure totaling 23.96 trillion naira, 14.3 trillion naira for debt servicing, 13.64 trillion naira for recurrent expenditure, 3.65 trillion for statutory transfers, with a 1.52% deficit to GDP ratio.
I raised an observation.
Some lawmakers are dissatisfied, citing the absence of some critical projects.
That on the 23rd of November 2023, I sponsored a motion here, co-sponsored by 35 senators from this corridor, on the need to construct standard gauge rail from Port Harcourt through Aba, Makurdi, to Maiduguri. We waited, the breakdown came out, and that rail line has zero allocation. You have to intervene. The presidency has opportunity for supplementary appropriation. Anytime he brings a request here, this Senate will consider it.
The same discontent was raised in the House of Representatives during the consideration of the bill.
Mr. Speaker, I want to bring the attention of the House in this item 281, Light Rail, Kano, Ogun, Lagos. Mr. Speaker, I'm from a zone, and none of the southeast and other zones are captured in this particular place. And this is the national budget. We have to look at it critically. It's not for a particular state, Mr. Speaker. A southeast need to be included. That is my point of order, Mr. Speaker.
Chairman of the House Committee on Appropriations, Abubakar Bichi, while presenting the bill for consideration, urged the executive to present subsequent budgets to the National Assembly not later than 3 months before the next financial year to maintain the January to December budget cycle.
The Joint Committee worked harmoniously with the leadership of the National Assembly and the executive arm of government in processing of the bill. This ensured a maximum collaboration of the two arms in the utilization of the additional revenue projection to improve the funding of some critical projects which could not be adequately funded in the budget process earlier submitted by Mr. President due to funding constraints. Mr. Speaker, our colleagues, observations. The 2025 appropriation bill was presented late, comparison with the 2024 appropriation bill. It was observed that there was an upward review of the budget from 49.7 trillion to 54.9 trillion to cater for the difference between the details of the bill, the procurement of vaccines, and the additional funding in some of agencies of government. Recommendations. The committee hereby recommends that the executive presents the budget to the National Assembly not later than 3 months before the next financial year. This will help return the country to the January to December budget cycle.
He also informed lawmakers that special provisions have been made for healthcare in the service-wide votes following the United States decision to suspend health funding support.
The provision of $200 million, which is equivalent to $300 billion for procurement of vaccine and drugs, and some agencies of government will provide funds to take care of their critical needs. The Joint Committee worked harmoniously with the leadership of the National Assembly and the executive arm of government in processing of the bill. This ensured a maximum collaboration of the two arms in the utilization of the additional revenue projection to improve the funding of some critical projects which could not be adequately funded in the budget process earlier submitted by Mr. President due to funding constraints.
Significant allocations in the bill include statutory transfers, Independent National Electoral Commission (INEC), the National Assembly, capital expenditure, Ministry of Defense, the Federal Ministry of Power, the Federal Ministry of Education, the Federal Ministry of Health and Social Welfare, Federal Ministry of Agriculture and Food Security, and the Federal Ministry of Livestock.
Now it's time to get into the details of how the tax reform bill scaled second reading in the House of Representatives. We'll also look at the House calling for a suspension of the proposed hike in telecoms tariff.
It was a big day in the House of Representatives on Wednesday. The House was full. The lower chamber dedicated the day solely to revive what could have been described as perhaps the most popular bills in the 10th National Assembly, the 4 tax reform bills scheduled for second reading.
Perfect document.
The debate began with lawmakers largely speaking in support of the bills.
Nobody knew that we will ever pass this bill in this House to go for second reading. But today, from what I've heard so far from our colleagues, I believe automatically this bill has gone for second reading.
There is need for us to harmonize the various tax bills that we have in this country. There is no denying the fact that most of the bills that deals with our taxes in this country are outdated.
No to the phasing out of relevant agencies of government that are popular and have also have a lot to deliver to the expectation of the people. Naseni, for instance, the TED Fund, for instance, the Speaker, the Leader of the House, I quote you, NIDA, for instance. I quote my leader for being so sagacious to say that these agencies will not be defaced. They will remain to continue to serve us.
However, there were some concerns.
Mr. Speaker, there is administrative and operational issues. There is ambiguity. There is preponderance of ambiguity in this act because of the absence of interpretation clause. The interpretation clause is not robust, did not address the issue of derivation. What is derivation in this act? What does it mean? It needs to be defined so that it will be interpreted correctly, so that it will be applied with the section that it is talking about. There is the issue of artificial transaction. What is artificial transactions? There is the issue of tax planning. We need to interpret it correctly. There is the issue of tax supply. We need to interpret all these words because they have great impact.
With due respect, Honorable Sir Asoli, time up, sir.
The bills also seek to amend over 40 acts which have not been placed before us. Those 40 acts should be placed before us so that we compare against those bills. About 40 acts are being repealed and being phased out by these acts that we are dealing with, Mr. Speaker. Then I'm also putting it forward that Section 38 of the Taxation Act.
We have other honorable members queued up that they want
Section
to talk.
38.
Please round up.
Section 38 presents a position of double taxation. If you are buying a property, the buyer will pay tax. Also, the seller will pay tax. This amounts to double taxation. And finally, my position on the inheritance tax. Inheritance tax, as a Muslim, we don't tolerate inheritance tax. You don't take away from the property, from the wealth of the orphan, and give it away to any other person, Mr. Speaker.
Budding entrepreneurs with young businesses who are oftentimes beladen or overburdened by tax pressure. This bill takes away that burden if your annual turnover is below 50 million as against what used to obtain when it was businesses below 25 million. So I look at the overall population of the target beneficiaries of the populist benefit or nature of this bill, and I give it a well-conceiving idea not minding that no bill is totally in itself self-sufficient. The sunset clause for TED fund is something that should be expunged. And I believe that stakeholders will submit memoranda to that effect, because TED fund has proved to be an interventionist agency which has come to bridge the gap, infrastructure gap in our tertiary institutions. And giving life to a child will only be improper to come when the baby is growing and you want to take off life from that same child.
I would deviate completely from what has been said to talk about Section 85. It talks about giving production credit for those who are producing gas. 30% of the fiscal gas price will be given to them as credit. Mr. Speaker, you are aware that today the non-oil sector contributes about 90% of our GDP, whereas the oil sector contributes about 5% of our GDP. But the irony of that statement is that this 5% of oil sector contribution to the GDP is what constitutes 60% of funds or revenue to budgets. And again, it contributes 90% of your foreign exchange. Therefore, we have to do a lot to ramp up crude production, and that is what Section 85 seeks to address.
All 4 tax reform bills are eventually passed through second reading. Meanwhile, the House on Tuesday called for suspension of the proposed hike in telecom tariffs.
% of funds or revenue to budget is what Section 85 seeks to address.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, sir.
High time for us not.
Controller Fatia.
% of
The last increase was done over a decade, over 10 years. And for somebody like I did say, coming from private sector, how do you expect them to increase their performance? Knowing that prices of virtually all the various indices have increased.
We are not saying tariffs should not be brought in, but not now. Let the telecom industry tell our people, let them show to us that what the people should be paying for is being given to them.
In the meantime, the House is asking the Inspector General of Police to take an immediate and decisive affirmative action to put an end to the wanton killings of citizens, kidnap and banditry in communities in Owerri West and Owerri North.
The House notes that the security of lives and properties is the primary responsibility of government as enshrined in the Constitution of Federal Republic of Nigeria, 1999, as amended. The House further notes that despite reports in the past, killing of innocent citizens, kidnapping and banditry in most parts of Owerri West, particularly in Avon, Oforola, Nekede, Ihiagwa, Obinze, Amakohubi, Okolochi, and some parts of Owerri North like Obiezena, Abala, Olakwo, in Owerri Federal Constituency, not much has been done by security agencies to stop this unprovoked menace in these communities. The House is worried that these attacks have escalated in recent years, leading to humanitarian crises and posing serious and endemic threat to national security. It is unacceptable that constituents, particularly in Owerri West and Owerri North, live in fear of violent attacks. The House is also worried that the indigents who are victims of these wanton killings, kidnapping and banditry may resort to self-help since they cannot stand by and allow these senseless killings continue unchecked.
Welcome back to the Gavel. This past week alone, 2 defections were recorded in the House of Representatives. Honorable Bene Tanabene spoke really aggressively about the need for the Speaker to declare the seats of the Dicampees vacant, citing the Constitution. So let's get an insight into what the Constitution says about defections on the breakdown with the Policy and Legal Advocacy Center plaque.
This will not be the first time that such defection is happening. in December of 2024, about 5 members defected from the Labour Party and the PDP to the APC. And from news reports, Amos Magaji is the 3rd PDP member that is defecting to the All Progressives Congress. So this is not the first time that this is happening. This is actually not new. In 2018, there was a mass defection of legislators. I think up to 50 of them defected from the APC to the PDP at the time. And this has raised several questions, among the public, of why this has kind of become a permanent feature of our political landscape and what exactly the law says. Our opinion is that such defections are illegal because the Constitution in section 68(1)(g) says that the seat of a member of the National Assembly shall become vacant if he leaves the party on which he was elected to the National Assembly before the expiration of the tenure of his seat and moves to another party. However, exceptions are provided. And one is where there has been a division in his party, that's the party he's leaving, or where there has been a merger of political parties, one of which is a party on which he contested and won. So the question now is, do these defections actually satisfy the provisions of the Constitution? And our opinion is that it does not. But then this has been tested in the courts. Some of these matters have gone to the courts in the past, and the courts have given different interpretations, although there's a judicial authority or a decision from 2015 that said that such division must affect the entire structure of the political party at the center, that is to say the national leadership. And I think the court gave that interpretation because the Constitution does not actually define or explain in detail what a division means. But in spite of this, we still see these defections happening, and then we see other members, or the members of the receiving party welcoming the defectors. This does not portend well for democracy. It shows that there's instability in the party, and it reinforces this belief and this perception that our political parties are weak, that they are not operating based on ideology. And we actually think that this could actually get worse because party defections are actually quite common before elections. So, politicians defect for different reasons, for personal interests, for their own personal advantage, and to gain electoral advantage. So far, based on the statement issued by the representatives of the spokesperson of the House of Reps, Honorable Akinrotimi, said there has been 8 defections from the minority caucus to the majority party, that is the APC. And, seeing the trend of these members being welcomed into the majority party, we actually see this as an encouragement to others who are thinking of defecting to actually take the step. So, going into 2027, I think we expect to see more of this until the courts make a very, very definitive pronouncement on this issue. Section 68(2) of the Constitution actually empowers the presiding officer, that is the President of the Senate or the Speaker, to announce vacancies. So even though Section 68(1)(g) prohibits members from defecting unless there's a merger or a division, it's not automatic. So it means that the presiding officer of the House, as the case may be, has to actually make that announcement, has to declare the seat of that member vacant. And I think there's this confusion of whether the presiding officer can actually make that announcement. So the view of the Speaker in the recent case that we heard about of Honorable Amos Magaji is that, a court order is needed for him to make that pronouncement. I think what the Constitution says is that the Speaker or the President of the Senate has to present evidence satisfactory to the House to implement that provision on a member vacating his or her seat. But again, there is confusion on whether he can do that just on his own or whether he needs a court order. But the prevailing opinion, at least within the National Assembly, is that a court order is needed for such pronouncements to be made. So going back to the meaning of division, the Constitution is not clear. It didn't state clearly what a division means. So, hopefully this is something that we hope the judiciary can clearly interpret because a lot of the members defecting always use the excuse that there's a crisis in the party. But then again, what do you mean by crisis? Does it satisfy the provisions of the Constitution? So this is actually quite unclear.
On Constituency Focus this week, we have Senator Francis Fadausi representing Osun East Senatorial District. Take a listen.
In the last 4 years, which we have not even finished, just last week, we still did about 2 or 3 empowerment, which no senator is even doing again. But nowadays, it should go beyond it. The power generation is poor now. The distribution is almost at 0. If the situation of power improves, then we want small scale industries. We have to go further. Enough of distributing 5,000 naira, which could not bring any development. If the state, like what Osun is doing now, Osun is now doing some major roads to connect the farmers. Then our own would like to do feeder roads in conjunction with the local government. The local government now is working, at least in Osun. That's my area. My area is Osun East. That's Ife, Idisa, Senatorial District. Our problem now is the major road, that federal road that passed through Osun to Ekiti, Ondo, and Kwara. So if those major roads could be done by the federal government, then we'll be okay. The remaining roads that we attract the farmers to come from the villages to town, that is our own problem, which is major. So we'll be able to cooperate with the state and federal, because we have been doing it, including bridges. Then we are going seriously to agric this year. God so kind. The 2 ministers in agric are all agric experts, and they are from Senate. So we have to go to meet, and we have met them to advance our own cause. Because the more we produce food, the less you see villagers coming to town to disturb peace. Then, if there is power, we have to connect them to do a lot of more of artisan work, which we are trying to do now. We have provided enough transformers, which at least there's no local government that got less than between 5 to 10 out of 11 local governments. We are still doing it. Then the rural electrification is the problem, which is major, which we have to start begging the federal government. And I know under President Tinubu, who is almost from rural area too, we know how to assist us. And by the grace of God, before we finish this, you will see that the economy will improve. Without the economy of the rural area improving, there's nothing the cities can do.
Well, that's all the time we have on The Gavel this week. Thanks for your time. Remember to catch this and others on YouTube. Simply search The Gavel or go to channelstv.com. I'm Terry Kumi. Goodbye.